Great to finally host you. I think we've been planning this ever since we've been kind of aligned with you guys and working with you guys. I think it's been like 6 months in the making. We're finally here. We've overcome COVID. We've overcome, a very difficult period, both personally and economically. I think we've seen the evolution of Mamo Pay, both as outsiders and insiders. We are in awe of your work, and we're really big fans, and we couldn't be happier to have you here. So first of all, thank you for making it to Duck It. Really, really appreciate it. There's a lot to talk about, a lot of things that we'd like to cover. But first, I would love for you guys to kind of maybe just quickly introduce yourself for the people who don't know who you are, and maybe introduce kind of your venture, Mamo Pay. Tell us a bit about, how it got started and how you guys came together.
Awesome. Thanks for having us. So my name is Imad, for those who don't know me. I was born and raised in Saudi Arabia. We actually grew up together.
Yeah.
So born and raised there, moved to Canada for university, joined Google immediately after that. Pretty much a techie and nerd at heart. So did engineering for a while there, and then decided to make the dramatic move to Dubai without having visited Dubai previously. And everyone was like, "You're crazy for doing that. How can you go from engineering to sales? Like, what are you doing?" Anyway, I would do it again. It was good times, and actually, in my first year, that's where I met Asim. We worked together at Google, and fast forward a few years, few being 8 or 9, it's a long time. We decided to actually pull the trigger and build what we've always wanted to build subconsciously, and that's where we are today.
Amazing. So just side note, I've known Imad like really, really long time. We were in the same high school, Conti. Some of the best days of my life. Maybe it's just nostalgia speaking. Now as I get older, I'm like, maybe it's just a nostalgia of it. But I've known you for quite a long time, and I think it's a blessing to be able to sit here across you and have these sorts of conversations. I think it's amazing that we've our careers and our lives have always been somewhat parallel in some way, from Jeddah to Canada, back to Dubai, etc. I think it's super, super exciting. Yeah.
Thank you for having us as well. Pleasure. And happy we got this just in the nick of time before the year end. Is
true. And just before there's more regulations that mean we have to go back home and quarantine. Hopefully not. Don't say that. Yeah. So obviously DUCKLIFE has been kind of close to you guys. We worked with you guys. We worked on your social media and your content and stuff a little bit, and it was honestly a breath of fresh air. What we loved about your brand was that you knew who you were. You knew very well what you wanted to sound like. You knew what you stood for. You knew what your kind of, benchmarking of quality was. Creatively, you were, completely different. And for us, working with brands on a day-to-day, and no disrespect to our other clients or to the region in general, this was a brand that actually was very clear and had a very concise vision on their brand. And as if you drill that backwards, if you kind of build it out, someone who's very clear in what their brand looks like and sounds like is somebody who absolutely knows what they stand for from a mission and vision and values standpoint. So typically content or how you communicate is the result of your brand kind of house, let's say. Not to get too technical in terms, but being clear on your purpose, on your vision, and on your values means that what you create becomes almost second nature. Being able to articulate that. I would really love to kind of dive into that. Being in fintech and trying to bring to market financial services is a huge undertaking, especially in this region, for multiple reasons. But I would really love to kind of dive into understanding what drove that mission to begin with within you guys. If you could speak to that.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So now it seems like we knew what we were doing. At the time of creation, it was much more experimental. I think Imad and I connected on many levels, but um, culture and how we positioned Mamo was incredibly important, just as important as the function of the company as well. So it's not just about building a great usable product, but also how the company positions itself, both internally and externally as well. Through the employee experience, not just the user experience as well. So yeah, at the beginning, that was it. That was a good starting point, and how we connected. How that unraveled was quite the journey, in the sense that we were experimental with a lot of products and services and ideas as well, until we agreed that we'd go to market with a peer-to-peer service and make it the best peer-to-peer service that existed, and kind of set the bar quite high in terms of how that experience would be for the user as well, at least as a starting point, and then developing from there into other services. I think from a cultural perspective, it was really important, just in the way we think about user experience, to position the company as a company that people would love to come and work for as well. Not just from an innovative sense, in terms of being in the fintech and all the hype that was surrounding that, but from a place of like waking up and being excited to come to the office and working as well. That's obviously easier said than done. There's a lot of work that goes into the background on how we make that happen. And sometimes you don't even see it on the foreground. Sometimes you may begin a piece of work around culture that only reaps the benefits in 6 months, 1 year's time as well. But it's having that agreement that this is important, and that we will see the benefits of that in the future manifest.
And so when you started, your ambition was to create a culture that really resonated with you personally, but that was a culture that you didn't find elsewhere around you.
That's a great question. I think, I'm sure Imad, you can jump in here as well. I think the reason for developing this culture and where it came from was very much from Google. I spent 7 years working from the Switzerland Zurich office, and then moved to Dubai, where I met Imad as well. So the seeds of what we're trying to create has definitely been influenced by Google, and then tweaking it for the region as well. So we had a good understanding of culture and what it meant, and obviously seeing the benefits. Imad spent 10 years at Google. I spent almost 7 years at Google. So we saw the benefits of it. It wasn't just fluff, it was real. And it has huge impact on bottom line revenues, which every business needs to take into consideration.
And I guess a kind of ignorant question would be, what is it that the region doesn't understand about culture, in your opinion? And why don't we see more and more organizations build really admirable cultures? What is it about the region specifically that hasn't produced these types of brands or these types of cultures, in your opinion?
Yeah, happy to jump in here. So culture is very personal, right? You're building something that you're going to every day, 8 hours, maybe more every day. You're kind of making your bed. You're going to be there all the time. So it's extremely personal journey to build it. There's very few things that are as personal. One of the things is money, and your relationship with money, and what money can or can't do. Can it buy happiness? Can it not? Does it help, etc.? So I think they seem separate. Like the product we're building and the solutions we're building seem separate than the culture we're building. But at the end of the day, it comes from the same motivation, which is to create something that you enjoy being in and living in. Yeah, whether it's a product or how you manage your money or the culture you go to. To answer your question on what the region lacks on culture, I think it also goes back to childhood as well, right? The way the Middle East in general functions, or typical families in the Middle East, is there's a standard cookie cutter template in which you should progress through life, right? Yeah. Be a doctor, be an engineer, be whatever, this and that, be a lawyer. And it's very rigid. And that, in my opinion, kind of filters through into what cultures we have today in the corporate world in the region. What we wanted to do is we wanted to give an alternative. There's an alternative way of being and working that isn't really common here. we borrowed that from our time at Google, and we tried to create a brand new culture in the most you wouldn't guess that fintech is the space where such a culture would be born, right? It's very like proper and people's money and serious. It's a serious kind of industry, right? So we wanted to create that understanding, empathetic, intuitive culture in the most difficult and challenging space you could possibly build such a culture in the region.
We had our work cut out here. Financial services and building a culture here. A quote comes to mind. You guys will know Khalil Gibran.
Yeah.
Yeah. All work is made. All work is love made visible. And that still sits in, I think, at the bottom of our website to this day, because that is our guiding kind of beacon of light. You know, there's no separation between work and life.
I absolutely agree with that. It's so funny to hear you say that, Imad, because I can obviously pull parallels. I was raised by an Arabic father in an Arabic community, and there is a roadmap that's almost kind of laid out when you're a bit younger and you're making your decisions of life. You kind of feel that you're supposed to follow a specific road, right? And it's quite formalized. It's unspoken, but it's kind of motivated, right? It's like you're supposed to, go to college, be an engineer, a doctor, an architect, if you're lucky. And you're supposed to stay within the framework that was kind of laid out. But when you compare it to the West, there's a much more, I would say, creative approach to what your future may hold. And when you look at Google specifically, or innovative companies, they have a very, I would say, creative approach to the kind of liberties that they give their staff, because they know that the product of creativity and of expression, if that's what creativity is supposed to be, the expression of love, is the ultimate solution that they're selling, which is innovation, which is technology, which is kind of new solutions to old and new problems. And it's just funny to hear that, because it almost sounds like culture, like regional culture, Arabic culture, being a bit more traditional and conservative, let's say, to some extent, and I want to pick my words carefully, but might at that time, and I feel like it's completely changing today. I feel like we have a new wave of innovation, of change, of creativity, of problem solving, etc. I think that's definitely happening. We're seeing it in our lifetime. I mean, if we look at Saudi Arabia, when we grew up to where it is today, it's a completely different country. So I feel like the culture is changing very quickly. But at the time, I feel like societies and markets that had given kind of the space for creativity to thrive in the workplace are societies that innovated like crazy, created brands like Google, created brands like Facebook, created brands like, Tesla, like et cetera, et cetera. Those are the markets that culturally allowed for innovation, and hence organizations that had the types of culture that you guys were a part of. And you guys are one of the first brands. I think we can name a few other companies in the region, but there's still not that many. I think we can count them on one or two hands tops. The amount of brands that have actually dedicated or committed themselves to creating those cultures. Now, I'm wondering, if we look at Mamo Pay today, if we look at kind of the products that you're building, if we look at the organization that you've kind of created, the people that you've hired, the processes that you've implemented, what has actually been driven directly by those values and by that culture and by that mission? Can you tell us exactly how it's been manifested in your day-to-day? Maybe give us examples if there's something you can share.
Yeah, there's probably tons, but like off the top of my head, and then you can jump in. Like hiring and the way we kind of talk and interview with candidates is something that is extremely inspired by that. Yeah. So a lot of times you end up talking to candidates who are so molded by this kind of system that we live in, and everything's rigid and there's a process and this and this and that. It becomes relatively quickly obvious that there's not going to be a cultural fit, with candidates in that kind of mentality. While at the same time, when you get candidates who are willing to, push limits and apologize instead of ask permission, that is really, really strong. And that kind of definitely, I would say, makes its way through to our hiring process. The other area is on a totally different, totally opposite end of the spectrum is the way we build product and the way we actually function internally as a team. We have a running joke where do things the right way with a trademark after it. It's because there's no shortcuts. If you're going to build something amazing, you can't take shortcuts. You can experiment fast and fail fast and go to market fast, but there are some things where there's no room for taking shortcuts, and that's usually on design and engineering, right? So those are two things I can think of. Yeah.
On the first point about hiring culture fit, I find that such an interesting topic. So when I present myself or I introduce myself to somebody, especially if I'm, trying to apply to Mamo Pay, for example, I'll research your guys. I'll go on your website. I'll look at your social media. I'll kind of understand the tone of voice. I kind of get an understanding of what you're looking for, and I'll try to fit in, right? So I won't come in a suit and tie. That's for sure. I'll probably come in a t-shirt, maybe some cool sneakers, some jeans, etc. And I'll try to fit in, even if it's not my nature. But I'll try to, adjust myself to the culture of that organization. I'll come in. I'll sit down with you guys. I'll be like, hey, I love what you guys are doing. I saw this post. Because that's what everyone does. They kind of try to fit into the mold. But obviously, as you said, you'll interview. You go through the first round, the second round, and you'll start to see what comes natural. You start to evaluate kind of the fit of the person. How much of culture can a person integrate into versus who they are innately? And this is something I think we've struggled with too at DUCKLIFE, right? We've really tried to articulate our culture. I think we're all very much aligned from a value system perspective and ambition perspective and purpose perspective, but it's very hard to really get it absolutely right. And sometimes you'll hire somebody, you're like, man, technically they're a great fit. Personality-wise, they're good. Character-wise, soft skills, pretty good. Culturally, there might be some challenges, but you're like, you know what? Screw it. We'll figure it out. They'll fit into our culture. They'll integrate. They'll be fine. And the next thing you know, 10 months down the road, the problem just snowballs and snowballs and snowballs. So I wonder, in your experience so far, you guys have been around for, a year and almost 2 years now. What have you learned? Is culture something that a person can integrate into? Can you bring someone into your crew and kind of sell them on your Kool-Aid, on your view of the world, on that? Or is it really something so fundamental as a technical skill that is absolutely required for the role? Is it the same measure for you?
Yeah, it's a great question. Look, I mean, the culture is incredibly important to us, and something that we, as Imad said, won't take shortcuts on at all. It's just so paramount, especially now that we've got a team at 21 people that share the culture. It's really important now we continue making sure we hire like-minded people. It sets the person up for success and sets the company up for success. I always say that it takes one person, a bad apple, to bring down an entire culture that was created over many years with many people, and it's not true the other way around. So it's really important to get the culture fit right. I also agree with you that it's extremely difficult to test. While interviews serve as a good way to preempt a lot of this stuff, it's really, really challenging to test. We divvy up our interview process. I tend to kind of test for culture fit and try and understand the person's psyche and their heart and their motivation. And the way I do that is through very piercing questions, and perhaps questions that they haven't even had thought about, or definitely not in an interview as well. And those are questions around self-awareness, awareness, and empathy and compassion, and how they understand these terms as well. And these are really telling signs of where the person is from a moral compass perspective. I think it's a good way to assess who we're speaking with, and to make sure that they ultimately come in and are successful at the company as well. It's in their best interest, for us to do these types of interviews.
I don't know if you want to say anything to that. No. I was going to say, when it comes to culture, and this is just a bit of a challenge and things, I'd almost answer it myself as well. do you think as a company, when you're hiring for a culture fit and that you want everyone to kind of almost be grouped into that one culture, do you think that consensus fit actually limits potential other opportunities of the way that the company can evolve and grow over time? Or do you think it's like paramount that everyone is, on point, by the book, a culture fit per se?
Yeah, it's a balance, right?
Yeah, so it's extremely relevant because a lot of times you sort of question, like, am I just building a culture of everyone's the same, and is that conducive to creativity and innovation? It's an actual open question. Like, I don't say we have an answer to it, but at the same time, it's not about everyone thinking the same way. It's about key principles or standards or values, very few, but that we expect from everyone, if they are to be compatible with the team. Again, as Asim mentioned, if you have a superstar performer that doesn't work well with the team, that's not going to work, right? We're not building a team of individual superstars. We're building a team that can work together really, really well. So although that question remains open, it's pretty clear to us from the interview process that we go through when someone has what it takes to not just survive, but excel and innovate on the team that they'd be joining at Mamo.
Yeah, applying a dating strategy is a good way to look at interviews. Like, same as you would when you date someone. Is there a connection? Will I get along with this person? Is there longevity in this relationship? Or is it a one-hit wonder,
You remember our first date?
Oh, man. It went really well.
It went really well.
Yeah.
And then you left me after like 7 months.
Yeah. I needed a break.
Yeah. We got back together.
So, I mean, I find the topic of culture super, super interesting because culture by definition is a group of people that speak the same language, an actual language or an organizational language, and that have a belief system that is shared, right? So it's quite loose. It's not like this everyone is super agreeable. We're all exactly the same. We don't wear all the same clothes, have exactly the same kind of point of view on everything. We can challenge each other, we can have conflict, but fundamentally, at the end of the day, when we drill it down, our 10 commandments, our belief system is based on the same things. If we're more impact driven or money driven, then that's a big one. Like, do we care more about money or do we care more about having a good impact? I think there are some fundamental things that will align us, but it doesn't mean that we're going to be super agreeable. And also, from my experience, and I wonder what you guys think about this, culture is organic. Right? So culture changes as the group evolves, as the group learns, as they work together, as how their experiences. You collectively have the same experiences as an organization, either as a family, a community, or an organization. At Mamo Pay, based on the experiences that you've had 2 years on, you probably have a different culture than you did when you started because you've matured as a group, right? You've experienced more as a group. You're more self-aware as a group. Right, et cetera, et cetera. So culture is super organic and it follows the life cycle of a brand. So the culture that you have today, 21 people, 2 years old, you've had your ups, your downs, you've had your challenges, you've had your successes. Your culture, the foundation will remain the same, but the culture itself will evolve and evolve and evolve. I remember, you have Asma in your team, fantastic woman. When we were at Kareem, the culture that we had early days to the culture we had later on was miles apart, but the foundation was the same. We believed in the same founding principles of why we were there, what we were meant to do from an organizational standpoint with the communities that we served, but the culture in-house and how we communicated our processes, et cetera, the space that we gave to specific opinions and things, that everything changed over time because the maturity of the organization changed. The needs of the business changed. And as we scaled, when we went from 12 people to 3,000 people, maintaining a culture and being able to hire 3,000 new people in your organization that believed fundamentally in exactly the same things you did was something that was almost impossible to scale. And if I dare say, we did not scale, right? And so that doesn't mean that we failed as an organization. It just means that the organization had to evolve. And so how do you guys see the future of your culture and maintaining that culture? How do you make sure when you get to the 3,000, 10,000, 500, 100 people in your team, there will come a point where you'll have to maybe change your outlook, or maybe the organization will shift a little bit. Do you see that ever becoming something that will evolve, or has your experience at Google shown you that no, guys, there are no corners, there are no hacks, there are no shortcuts, there are no. Is that how do you guys feel about that? Because from my experience, scaling culture is something that's extremely difficult, if not impossible. And that doesn't mean that the culture is bad. It just means that the culture is evolving. How do you guys see that?
Look, I think it's a flywheel. So you get it started, and then yes, organically, the culture grows and evolves. But I would say that forgetting about culture is one of the biggest factors that that influences the lack of culture. You could, as you said earlier, write it on a wall and speak the words, but if you don't live it, wear it, breathe it, it's gonna kind of dissolve. So, and I hope that we can continue giving the importance to culture and performance management and employee engagement stuff, to the end of time, because that's what's required. I think it's sometimes it's difficult when a company is growing exponentially to keep an eye on everything, However, I think it's important to keep an eye on culture as important as bottom line KPIs as well. We have the kind of design thinking mechanism, that Venn diagram that applies to this: human desirability, technical feasibility, business viability, right? Keeping those quadrants in balance is so vital, and we divvy these tasks up. What's important is that the founders equally appreciate this. I appreciate what Imad does from a technical perspective. He appreciates what I do from a org design perspective as well. And then that kind of influences other leaders and managers inside the company to continue the baton.
So I'd also draw two parallels, or not parallels, but I've mentioned two kind of things that are really important to do, to think about: habits and communication. Right, the same way. If you spend 30 days doing something every morning, it's going to become a habit. The same applies to culture. It's the little things that count. Yeah, it's not, you're not going to have like a monthly meeting where you say, this is the culture, therefore it happens, right? It doesn't work like that. Little things that you do, little messages you send, little emails you send, how you communicate to the team, all these little things over time add up to create what is called culture. The other thing I would say is, like, the responsibility for culture is not on one person, it's not on the leader, it's not on the founders, it's on everyone. And we talked a bit about the values that we kind of test for in our process. Communication and being very blunt in feedback is something super important to us. We encourage feedback up, down, left, right, all the time, right? If you're the type who is going to be shying away from giving feedback upwards or downwards or sideways, you're not going to be helping create and maintain that culture. So by design, our team, the way they're hired, are encouraged and responsible for kind of maintaining that culture alongside us.
It's a full-time job.
100%.
On its own, yeah.
100%.
Yeah, it's full-time. The other thing on the hiring front is like, whoever's hiring, like, your culture, you can maintain it to a point, right? If it's fixed within your hiring process, but then obviously you guys kind of sit in that leadership founder team, being able to hire, but as you scale, you've got to almost hand that baton over to more and more people down the team. And I think when we go back to our days of like companies scaling quickly, as you hand over the role of more and more people hiring within their own teams to empower them, if that's part of your culture, empower people to run and grow. That's also kind of an area where you sometimes see that kind of culture fit or the mishiring perhaps start to come into play. Second, or a follow-up question to it is, given that we've kind of moved to this kind of work from home status, and given over the last 18 months, and then you guys may even have people or colleagues further afield, how do you like sustain culture within a work from home environment based on your existing team? How have you found that? And then secondly, people that you've brought into your team, if you have already or if you haven't, what are you thinking about to like bring them into the Mamo Pay culture and founding principles of who you are?
Yeah, it's a good one. So first one on the remote culture, it's incredibly challenging. It's one thing doing it in person, doing it remotely is definitely a test of how we go about that. Everything from the manifestation and the tangible things that we do to make sure that employees remotely are engaged. all the way through to making sure that they're not forgotten about. It's easy, out of sight, out of mind type of thing, you know. So while we would love to be in a better position from a cultural perspective with remote teams, we're not there yet. You know, we're aware of it. We recently done our employee engagement survey, first one for Mamo after 2 years, which is around about the right time in terms of how many employees we got as well. And it was clear and evident that we need to do more work with the remote team as well. Thankfully, we don't have a huge remote team right now, so it's manageable. But we have data to show that more attention and intention is needed there as well. And we've already mobilized from the survey, which was done a month ago, so on what to do next, you know, around that as well. The second question was?
So the second part is like, as you like grow, as you're going to grow and like hire and build out kind of that team, like how are you kind of thinking about, you know, that Mamo culture, transferring that to make sure that it's as powerful, as dominant, kind of going into those teams? Because teams are going to explode all across the world, right? That's the opportunity that we have.
So, I mean, we haven't like intentionally done this, but it just, now that you asked, it's pretty obvious. Like when we're hiring, it's not just Asim and I interviewing at all. It has never been that way. So we're kind of, whether consciously or subconsciously, that decision was made. We're grooming everyone on the team to help us with interviews. Everybody's trained. The way we split up interviews, like Asim would focus on culture fit. Let's say Asma would focus on role fit. I would focus on. We have different types of fit interviews that we do. By the end of the process, we've done like, you know, dozens of interviews. Everyone knows how to interview. Everyone knows what to look for. Another thing is like we're absolutely crazy about documenting everything. You guys probably remember from working with us.
It's good. It's good. We respect
it. But that applies to everything. And culture documentation, technical documentation, PRDs, and then evaluations on interviews are meticulously documented. Yeah. So if you're a new joiner and you want to help out on interviews, you have an entire library of how evaluations are typically done at Mamo. So you can't help but be groomed for the hiring process. And I hope that this becomes kind of like the guide on how to interview and how to maintain that culture at Mamo.
Yeah, and just to extend what Imad said, like once the person, let's say, is successful with an interview and joins Mamo, there's a whole process that happens to onboard them as well.
That was going to be my next.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the most challenging part as well, because you've just done a relentless set of interviews. You still got to build product. You still got to manage everything else. And then doing an onboarding process is needs to be customized for every employee, whether it's engineer, product design. Each one of them would have a different process. Something that we're tinkering and working on all the time. But for example, the first week we've kind of have an agreement where the new employee that does what they like, and this is influenced from Google. We have a Noogler week or Noogler 2 weeks, where the person comes in and does whatever they like. That doesn't mean they don't work, but they get to know the team. They look around the repositories, see what exists, and get a lay of the land without any pressure of kind of delivering anything as well. I think that's a good way to make sure that the new employees set up for success without having proper onboarding processes, which requires an entire HR team, etc. as well. Which we are working on and developing. But just to come back, one example that comes to mind of how values and culture and personality of the company manifest outwards in interviews and in hiring. I won't name any names or any employees here, but we recently had interviews, and I think Imad and I were, thumbs up, person looks good. One of our employees who interviewed said, no, not feeling this person, right? And not just saying that, wrote an entire one-pager as to why, and the answers and the questions and the answers that the candidate gave as well. And this is true manifestation and empowerment of the culture. Every employee is protective of it. It's a sacred place, so much so that they felt they need to write a one-pager document to highlight why they think that this is a no hire to Imad and I. Yeah.
I have I think that's incredible. I think what I wonder is, in this market today, in this startup ecosystem that's exploded recently, what is, in your mind, if you could articulate the competitive advantage for Mamo Pay from a cultural perspective in attracting talent? Right? I think there's naturally, of course, there's a filtration and qualification of, does it fit the organization? And then obviously the byproduct of that will be an organization that runs more smoothly. But when you look at the available talent out there today, in the region at least, there's not a huge abundance of talent. Every role, every opportunity that we have at DUCKLIFE, I'm sure you have at Mamo Pay, filling those roles are becoming more and more challenging because there's just so much demand. So what's the role of culture, and how has it helped you compete really in terms of attracting and maintaining talent?
So most of the feedback, and I'll speak only from the feedback we've received from candidates who have applied, rather than what I think is the answer. What we typically receive in feedback from everyone who applies who's really serious about Mamo is like, been on your website, your values are amazing. I've never seen a company who's that serious about values. I'm really excited to join and go through the entire process. That is not a mistake, right? That Asim mentioned, you mentioned, Steve, also. It's a full-time job, right? And it takes a lot to be able to articulate and give that perception outwards. And it's definitely not, it just happened. Yeah, it's an intentional, concerted effort to do that. And it's not something that pays off in a week or in a month or maybe in a year. And the other thing I'd say is that when you talk to the ecosystem, to other startups, to people who have applied, to investors, to whoever it may be, the same feedback resurfaces, right? I'll give you one concrete example. When we say no to candidates for whatever reason, job has been filled, missing culture fit, missing skill sets, whatever, we send a very empathetic apology email. Intentionally to every single candidate, no matter how much we think there was no fit, we send that email out, and we actually ask them to ask us if they want feedback on why, and we actually reply to every single candidate. That, if you look at the response you get from folks who receive those emails, is amazing. They're so appreciative, and everybody knows how annoying it feels to apply to a company and get no answer in 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks. Right? So this empathy and feeling the pain of users, of candidates, of investors, of whoever it may be that we're dealing with, doesn't just make its way to our product. It makes its way to our interview process. It makes its way to our investor meetings. It makes its way to the way we deal with employees internally. So it's truly a value that we believe in.
So if they're not a colleague, they become a brand advocate or a customer, right? It's ultimately where you're...
Absolutely. That's the idea behind it as well. And I think just from experience too, it's just nice not to get stonewalled and have some sort of feedback,
Yeah, I think generally the region over here is allergic to conflict and allergic to saying no in general. I mean, the amount of organizations that you do business with, or people that you do business with, if they're afraid of declining either on a personal, social relationship or a professional relationship or an organizational relationship, most organizations, in the region, rather than saying no or no thank you, most people will just ghost, right? And that's a cultural problem that we have in the Middle East. But yeah, I think that's amazing.